I can officially say good evening to all because I don't think by definition it's after, well, technically all evening is afternoon, but you know what I mean. We've shifted our time zone, or I should say the start time for our webinars, to make it more feasible for people across different time zones to be able to participate because the reality is life has never been busier. So we're doing what we can to make these things a little bit more optimal for those who want to join after work. And I'm really excited about this month. I should say the start of a 3 month feature where we are doing our our bread and butter, but done in a new way, with the idea of examining everything from the gut perspective as an ecosystem. And we're going to pair three different categories of products and focal points in terms of how to nurture the ecosystem idea. Because for those who are deep in research, the more you really learn about the gut, the more you realize how interconnected everything in the gut is. And it's a super exciting time to be specialists in the field of gut research because it's never been more popular. And I don't know if anyone else has the same sensation that I do, that the more you read and research, the more you try to understand, after a while, you don't get answers. You just ask deeper questions. And it's the systems thinking that will allow us to have ultimately what I believe to be an accurate perspective when it comes to client care, due to the fact that, again, we've talked about this, our diagnostics are only so sensitive. And when it comes to being able to pair a product with a person, it really has to be based upon a mix between objective information and diagnostics and the subjective analysis of symptoms and what that person presents. Because although it's a little old school, it's still very, very valuable. If I have some time, I'll talk about, just something that's contextually appropriate for my reality given to some client work that I was doing recently. So as per usual, I'm going to get rid of looking at myself. I am going to begin today's slideshow from the beginning, talking about your gut as an ecosystem one. So this month, November and December, we're rounding the year out strong, getting back into focusing on the digestive system. And for those who joined last month's webinar, focusing on the immune system, I want to thank you that it scratched an itch, a technical itch, in terms of some deep scientific mechanisms of actions and connections that we haven't done in a while. So I'm going to do my best to keep that in this vein to honor the science of what Master Supplements and US Enzymes and Tomorrow's Nutrition Pro puts forward, not only behind their products and the innovation and claims behind them, but to honor how things have always been done with this company. So without further ado, we're going to introduce the first idea. Act one, your gut as an ecosystem. So the definition of an ecosystem, and I really like the succinctness of this definition, a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. And with an ecosystem on this planet, and I've put forth this idea before, and the more I think about this idea and I look for these patterns in the body, subjectively, the more it holds true. All variables of an external ecosystem are interdependent and influence the outcome of the terrain. I.e., if you introduce a species artificially into an ecosystem, that could have a positive or negative effect on the delicate balance of the ecosystem. If we look at what the Earth is doing currently, or I should say the state of our natural world, some would say it's not necessarily as healthy as it used to be. You look at the state of farmland in North America, ask any farmer, and there are a lot of pressures from a societal economic perspective that are forcing agriculture to do things that is unfortunately dishonoring the ecosystem. And the negative consequence is the health of the terrain, i.e., Mother Earth. The human, in my opinion, is a fractal of the planet. We are our own little planet in and of ourselves, and there's a lot of parallels between the Earth as an organism and us as an organism. So I think the biological community of interacting organisms in their physical environment, it's also a pretty good definition for the human ecosystem. And our ecosystem is not only the gut, it's what we're talking about today because it is the most important place of where ecosystem activity and diversity take place. But the archaea, the bacteria, the viruses, the fungi, the parasites, there is this dynamic flux, and there's an optimal state for every person, and there are an infinite amount of suboptimal permutations for every person. And it's these suboptimal permutations that are ultimately going to influence the outcome of our health. The epicenter of our human ecosystem is the gut microbiome. So it's the coming together of the digestive cells in the digestive system, the microbes that inhabit the microbiome, known as the microbiota, their physical environment, the mucosal lining, and the immune system that resides principally within our digestive system. It's the interactions of these three aspects of us, the influence of these three that create the gut immune axis of the microbiome. And it's the interplay and the dynamics between these different biotics. The word biosis is actually a Latin rooted term for life. And if you read our article this month rather, I put forth the idea that the word prebiotic, when you break it down, is really pre-life. And it's an interesting concept when you think about a carbohydrate being a term that's described as pre-life. But over the next 3 months, I'm going to do my best to tie together the prebiotic, probiotic, symbiotic relationship and how the postbiotic outcomes, aspects of our physical self, can play a massive role in how the gut connects to all other body systems within our physiology. So, part one is what we're going to go over today. Prebiotics, the various substrates that feed, nourish, and stimulate all life within the microbiome. Part two is going to be next month, focusing on probiotics, and we're going to actually bring enzymes into the last month to show you how the interactions between enzymes can have an effect locally within the gut, or if the gut is imbalanced and dysbiotic, it can have a systemic or peripheral effect in helping the body support those areas that have become compromised, pathological disease due to the gut microbiome axis breaking down. And this is what we do better in my opinion. I'm highly, highly biased, but I'm okay with that. But this is what we aim to do better than anyone else in the marketplace because it is our specialty and we try to play to our strengths at all times. So we have to understand prebiotics. We're going to put on our propeller hats and take a deep dive into the world of non-digestible carbohydrates. There really are two major categories of fibers, and most of you have heard this before, but a little review is not a bad thing. There's an insoluble fiber. And the specific action that makes it insoluble is it simply doesn't dissolve in water. This is what most of the world thinks fiber is, and most insoluble fibers are either entirely non-fermentable or mostly non-fermentable because there are some soluble aspects of an insoluble fiber depending upon the carbohydrate chain structure. Soluble fibers is what we're going to focus on, and it's soluble simply because it dissolves completely in water and therefore it is fermentable and it has different degrees of solubility. So these special SDFs, soluble dietary fibers, have a high affinity for water, and their main job in the dietary aspect is to influence the terrain in the colon. So these are specialized fibers that humans do not have the ability to break down, and they are composed of a multitude of different oligosaccharides, and they have specific characteristics that influence their behavior within the gut. So with fiber, structure determines function. An insoluble fiber has very specific bonds that have to be broken down by microbes enzymatically, whereas soluble fiber has the same things, but over time they will degrade or denature naturally in water. This is an important idea to remember. All prebiotics are fibers, but not all fibers are prebiotics. And this is where the consumer education is super important for a multitude of reasons. Most people, it's like the same idea when someone hears the word mitochondria, the thing that comes to their mind is the powerhouse of the cell. It's what you learned in grade 10 biology and it's never left you. The same thing is with fiber. Fiber helps you poop. Now, all fibers directly and indirectly help move the bowels. When it comes to the consumer knowledge of fibers, they think of Metamucil or various things that their grandparents would take because their doctor told them to take it on a regular basis to stay regular. In reality, it's not the best way to stay regular, especially if someone's dehydrated. The multitude of ways that soluble fibers can help regulate bowel function is actually more impactful for the gut microbiome. But the difference between soluble and insoluble fibers is insoluble fibers really do nothing to feed and build the microbiome. You can think of them as kind of like scouring pad for the colon, where they will allow things to move through. It gives the muscles of the colon something to contract against, whereas a soluble fiber will be the catalyst to create the various metabolic byproducts, i.e., the postbiotics, that are either going to be absorbed by the small and large intestine, specifically the large intestine, or excreted in poop as a chelating product for detoxification. So we have to understand that when someone uses this concept, these STFs, the whole idea is their nature's way of stimulating and nurturing the microbiome. It starts with the birthing process. It is then nurtured by the feeding process during the first few weeks and months of life. And the methodology of slowly introducing a baby to a young child will be exposing them to different foods. And these are called microbiota accessible carbohydrates, which then generated the idea of what a prebiotic is. And this blew my mind. The definition of a prebiotic was only first published in 2017 from my research. And if anyone has a different piece of history, please let me know because that blew my mind. Prebiotics are everywhere. You go into Whole Foods, there's prebiotic soda, these little, energy sticks plus prebiotics. So this industry is trying to capitalize upon the nature of these things becoming very popular, and the desires of people to do everything they can to stimulate beneficial aspects for their gut. But the nature of a prebiotic is interesting because here it says that it's a selectively used substrate by the host microorganisms conferring a health benefit. Later on in the lecture, we'll talk about why not all prebiotics are the same. And if anyone's had one of those protein bars with 13 grams of inulin fiber and the next day you looked like you were 4 months pregnant, we'll explain why that is. So the true definition of a prebiotic has to have these three characteristics to be termed a prebiotic, i.e., it has to be easily fermentable, it has to affect the host microbiome. Notice how it didn't say positively affect, it just said affect, and it has to be selectively used by host microorganisms, i.e., the microbes in the microbiome will either directly break them down or break them down as a team to create some sort of outcome that's beneficial for them and us, the host. Now, here's the interesting thing. Some prebiotics, as the research becomes elucidated, are actually being shown to not be fiber-based. So if you see right there, CLAs and PUFAs, those are fatty acids and essential fatty acids, which are now in some ways being seen as a prebiotic for the benefits that they can infer within the human gut. So to me, this makes sense as to why you might want to pair your fiber with some high quality essential fatty acids. The other things are phenolic compounds and phytochemicals. These are what nature prepackages with the fibers in food. So the proanthocyanidins and blueberries, the ellagic acids and pomegranates. Uh, in the optimal way, nature wants to package these things together because there's likely some wisdom and intelligence in terms of why they're going together. So the important message to take home from this is you still want to try to do this as often as you can from nature because nature packages things in the optimal way. But when you know that your client is likely not going to eat well based upon your suggestions because they have likes and dislikes or various things that are in the way, this is where using strategic prebiotics can be very beneficial. So the types of prebiotics are numerous, and each prebiotic theoretically has a different composition to its fiber, B, a different target to be broken down to, i.e., there's specific strains of bacteria or multitudes of strains that are going to have an affinity for specific prebiotics. So if someone wants to grow certain kind of bacteria, theoretically, you should be able to select a diet that nurtures lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, Akkermansia, fecalum, what have you. I think the best strategy is providing someone does not have a sensitivity or a negative reaction to foods, rotate through different foods as often as possible because rotating prebiotics is probably the best strategy to ensure microbial diversity based upon how they're broken down. Now we're going to get into that. So if you put your propeller hats on, now it's time to clean off your glasses. We're going a little bit deeper. So the human intestine only has the ability to break down one specific kind of carbohydrate, which has an alpha bond. Those are the carbohydrates that the enzymes in our pancreas and our and saliva and whatnot break down, and we can extract energy from those. But it lacks the specific enzymes to hydrolyze the polymer bonds of a prebiotic. It's called a beta bond. So this allows them to get past the stomach, past the small intestine, into the end part of the small intestine or the beginning proximal part of the large intestine, where they're acted on by the bacteria themselves. So the body will transport these prebiotics totally intact to the colon, where they're degraded by the specific intestinal flora that are present, and they're selectively fermented to produce secondary metabolites, which have a multitude of different purposes. We call these postbiotics now. So they can be short chain fatty acids, they can be various peptides, they can be specific kinds of conversion products, and they're either meant to do one of three things. One, feed the bacteria directly. Two, influence the local environment in the colon. Three, influence the overall health and well-being, or potentially take away from the overall health and well-being when things are imbalanced of the host. And in a perfect world, there's a multitude of different beneficial aspects to what these prebiotics can do once they're properly broken down. They can influence the immune system. They can help the body resist the infection of potential pathogens or known pathogens. They can help nourish the gut lining to ensure that the gut barrier junctions don't break down and leaky gut's problematic. They can enhance mineral absorption. And there's a ton of research showing how regular intake of various fibers can help improve things like lipid dynamics in the blood, cholesterol dynamics, and even insulin response to a meal. So there's a metabolic benefit. This is the geekiest slide on the whole thing because we have to understand the importance of microbial diversity. So these fibers enter the colon through the small intestine, and it's actually the enzyme systems of the microbes that do the major work on the specific prebiotics that people eat. And, when we look at the microbiome, we have an incredible number of bacterial genes that far outnumbers the actual quantity of human genes simply within the quantities of bacteria in the gut alone. And these bacteria, based upon the profile and the diversity, are either going to have an adequate ability to break down these probiotics and ferment them, or if these bacteria aren't present, this ideal scenario that I'm showing here might not be possible. Because you have to ask, what happens when someone has dysbiosis? What happens when someone has had a multitude of rounds of antibiotics? These forever change the internal ecology of the gut. And if a specific strain or species are either not present, underrepresented or underpopulated or overpopulated, this is where this delicate balance gets thrown off because there are these multitudes of enzyme systems that have to work together. So these microbes will depend upon each other, whereas a bifidobacteria might initially break down the first long chain prebiotic and generate something. They will pass the conversion product to another strain of microbe, which will maybe convert it to something like butyrate, or it might convert it to something like propionate or a peptide. This is what's called cross-feeding. And I believe this is the reason why when people have negative responses to certain kinds of foods, certain kinds of fiber supplements, what have you, it's not the nature of the food or the fiber is problematic. Their gut is not ready for such a prebiotic because it doesn't have the ability to properly convert it or break it down, or it's over fermenting it and not converting it, creating things like gases, hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen methane. And this is why some people get extremely gassy when they're trying to do prebiotics in high doses for the very first time. The most important decomposition product are the short chain fatty acids because they do one of two major things. The short chain fatty acids can act as a food source directly for the microbiome. They can act as a food source for the colonocytes, the epithelial lining of the colon, to make sure that the cells of our colon, which are the fastest replicating cells in the body, are functioning optimally. Or they can actually get out of the gut, go through the portal vein to the liver, and become something that influences overall metabolic function, even systemic immune health and metabolic health, signaling things like satiety regulation and leptin sensitivity in the brain. The three major short chain fatty acids that get produced are acetate, propionate, and butyrate, all of which are either 3, 4, or 6 carbons long. And in some cases, some succinate and some lactate are also produced by intestinal microbes, usually in small amounts. And the main job of those specific fatty acids is to anchor the internal environment in the small and large intestine, because all of these things have to take place in a certain state of oxygen deprivation and at a certain pH so that the enzyme systems of the microbes are most active and most efficient. So when you're doing such things, this is another reason how fiber can also be a major regulator of health in the internal environment of the gut, because a lack of fermentation reduces the quantity of acids available. A lack of acids being available has a negative effect over the pH because it increases the pH and promotes alkalinity. And when someone has alkalinity excess in the small and large intestine, not only do very sensitive species or strains of microbes not have the ability to thrive and proliferate, you can also promote the growth of fungi and allow for easier colonization of other species such as parasites. So the workflow is very simple. The long chain prebiotic carbohydrates come in, specific microbes act upon them from different phyla, different families. They convert them into intermediate processes or intermediate metabolites, which are then acted upon by different families or different strains of bacteria, and they break them down into their smallest constituents before these little carbohydrates are converted into fats, specifically by strains and families that are designated as either butyrate producers, acetate producers, and propionate producers. If this works well, you have a system that is seamless, foolproof, and not only maintaining a healthy internal environment, but a healthy peripheral metabolism, as mentioned before. And we have to look at how many beneficial things happen simply by regulating the kinds and the intake of fiber in someone's diet. So at the gut barrier level, you have an enhanced immune response. Immune cells can talk to each other more efficiently, reducing the risk of infections. The changes in pH and solubility, and also the osmolarity of having hydration in the small and large intestine, can enhance mineral absorption. You can induce response of tolerance within the immune system. So someone who has a lot of food sensitivities or even severe food allergy might get benefit from regulating the amount of prebiotic fiber in their diet. You can enhance the motility and the peristalsis of the gut. So people who suffer from chronic constipation, to those with IBS or any kind of enteric nervous system disorder, may relieve some of the stress and challenges that they have in terms of bowel evacuation. You can, as I said, regulate the leptin sensitivity in the brain through the pathways in the gut. And the last thing is you can actually nourish the gut lining. So downregulate the potential for leaky gut and the breakdown of zonulins, which ultimately disintegrate tight junctions. If you come up from the gut level to more of an organ system level, there's a lot of gut-brain communication that regulates itself with regular fiber production, or rather short-chain fatty acid production from fiber ingestion. So you can signal things that help to release GLP-1 naturally, which is a very, very hot topic right now. A lot of people are looking for ways to enhance GLP-1 effects in terms of injections. I say, why not regulate naturally what you have through optimal diet selection? Because the gut-brain axis is very much a bidirectional communication, that what's going on in the brain as it regulates someone's sense of hunger, satiety, and desire to eat can be positively influenced by fermentation going on in the gut. In the digestive system itself, you can downregulate a series of immune activated responses. So an HDAC is a histone deacetylase, which basically helps to silence the inflammation once it's inhibited, which short chain fatty acids can do. And there are a lot of aspects to promote secretion of gastric mucosa through the goblet cells, i.e., you can reaffirm the strength of the physical barrier of the gut and entrap things. And you can also create a better environment for microbes to live, because the microbes actually need thick mucosal lining to properly adhere and colonize and give birth to healthy bacteria, on and on. And the last aspect is at the organism level. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but because you guys will get these slides, this is a great teaching tool to show you how there's so much that can be systemically regulated in a multitude of different organs, just based upon the fact that the microbes in your gut are properly fermenting the optimal kinds of prebiotics and having a peripherally beneficial effect. So in summary, because this was definitely our thickest part of the whole webinar tonight, these highly specialized fibers, all of specific structure, act as fermentable substrates for our gut microbes. This is the true nature of what a prebiotic fiber is and what its role is. And ultimately, the benefit for the person is the effects it has locally within the gut and also the influence it has on systemic activity. The end product fermentation of the food we eat, and obviously the fibers we're taking from the microbes, results in the synthesis of a short chain fatty acid, which has the effect of helping to anchor the health of our gut lumen, i.e., where the microbiome resides, and an overall beneficial effect to the host via the communication between the gut and whatever systemic organ axis we're talking about. So the overall health effects of prebiotic ingestion can be multifactorial, and for the person who is interested in being proactive and preventative, from a research perspective, one of the easiest and also best strategies to make sure that your gut is going to help you stay healthy into the long term. Now, I was thinking about this before because we live in a world where marketing dominates now and people remember things. My favorite example of this is when someone asks for a Kleenex. A Kleenex is a brand. A Kleenex is a manufacturer of tissue paper. So I thought, how can we start to teach people something that's easily remembered? For me, taking the first letter of a word and pairing it is the easiest way to do that. So I want to introduce you to the idea or the concept of a functional fiber. Now, a functional fiber is going to be delineated from a food-based fiber because it is a specifically non-digestible carbohydrate, what makes it a fiber, that's extracted from a plant or it's synthetically made, ideally extracted from a plant is best, and added to foods or supplements because of the health benefits. So unlike dietary fiber, which occurs naturally and specifically in foods, again, there are different kinds of fibers that are mixed together in foods. A functional fiber is isolated from a substrate and utilized for its targeted health benefits, specifically digestive effects and metabolic health improvement, so on and so forth. So this is what I'm going to start using as a term because a functional fiber is something that should be a universally beneficial thing that's working for us to help our bodies perform at the optimal level. So these are how we do functional fibers. The basis of all of them is the same thing. It is the partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which I'm going to get into next. So the purest expression of this is SunFiber. If someone has the need for something a little bit more clinically focused due to pathology, inflammation, what have you, well, that's what SunSpectrum is for. If someone wants to promote more regularity or they have the desire to have something that fits into the grab and go lifestyle, that's what SunFiber GI does. It's SunFiber paired with Bifidobacterium lactis. And if someone has unfortunately had the negative consequences of excessive use of antibiotics or for some reason feels that they have a low quantity representation of things like bifidobacteria, well, that's what TruFiber is. It's the combination of SunFiber and bifidogenic enzymes. All of these fibers have their place. And the wonderful thing about a fiber in regards to its role as a supplement compared to, say, something like very powerful herb, fiber doesn't have to be cycled. Fiber can be something that you use on a regular basis, and in many cases should, because let's be honest, the quantity of people who hit their assumed 38 grams of fiber on a regular basis in the Western world is probably few and far between. And beyond that, because the average person eats so few foods in terms of diversity, their opportunity to build a healthy gut ecosystem and microbial diversity, specifically the kinds that you want there, the bifidobacteria and the lactobacillus, probably quite compromised because the average person goes through what? Carrots, celery, maybe some cucumber, some iceberg lettuce, an apple, banana, and that's really it. Those are like the six plant foods that most of the Western world indulges in. So my idea is using a functional fiber as a supercharging effect is a good way to do two things. Number one, you're making sure that the person's increasing their relative quantity of fiber. So it's going to have short and long-term benefits to the gut. But secondly, you're going to have some changes that make the person feel good and motivated. And that's when I find clinically mentality shifts to people wanting to take on more and do more in terms of enhancing their own health and their health journey. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, we have to talk about how SunFiber is unique. So SunFiber is actually a simple substrate. It's a very naturally grown water-soluble dietary fiber derived from guar beans, specifically the inside lining of the husk. and it's produced by partially hydrolyzing the guar gum, so it's enzymatically broken down, so its viscosity is reduced. And when it has low viscosity, that's the functional aspect of why the fiber does not create a gel like a chia pudding or a chia seed when you put it in water. The low viscosity allows it to essentially mix seamlessly in water while maintaining its beneficial properties. So it's an easier sell to someone of having just that rather than gulping down some goopy stuff that has a weird aftertaste. So SunFiber is known for a few notable characteristics. One, its ability to promote overall better digestive health, especially on the elimination side. Its low viscosity can be put in anything. So if you have the pickiest people, the most discerning palate probably won't find it in any foods. And I would even challenge them to find it in water. And that's what's so good about the neutral taste. There's really no reason not to use it. And there are many other health benefits, many of which lend themselves to immune health, immune modulation, metabolic health, which I've already mentioned, and the ability to target specific microbes that have a long lasting effect to change the microbiome even after they stop using fiber, providing that they've used it for a reasonable amount of time. So the process of making it is essentially the dried soluble fiber from guar gum is enzymatically converted and processed to create pure PHGG. So it's partially hydrolyzed guar gum. And that is essentially all that's in this product, and which is why it's so pure and it's so well tolerated, because it is a product that essentially anyone can take, even someone on a carbohydrate restricted diet and a low FODMAP diet. And here's what's interesting. They've done I don't want to say it's called safety testing because it's not safety testing, but they've done a maximal dosage tolerance test of up to 60 grams a day with no negative side effects across all who participated in said examination study. But the daily recommended dose is 5 grams. For the most sensitive people, I suggest starting with 2.5 grams, then working your way up to 5 grams. And the reason SunFiber is so well tolerated is it has a unique physical property to it. Its molecular size, its osmolarity is actually measured. So there's this idea of a measurement unit called a Dalton. And a Dalton shows the ability of a product to have a certain molecular weight, and that molecular weight is what has a targeted effect on what kind of microbe it's able to feed. So most popular prebiotics, we're talking inulin fiber, chicory root, FOS, fructooligosaccharides, XOS, GOS, the various oligosaccharides. Approximately speaking, they range from 1,000 to 8,000 Daltons, whereas SunFiber is much larger in its size. It's 20,000 Daltons. Why does that matter? Certain prebiotics have the ability to feed everything. When would that matter? Well, if someone has a dysbiotic gut, if they have a state of unhealthy gut function based upon the microbes that are living in their gut, you could actually strengthen the ability of those potentially pathogenic commensals to reside and stay alive. Whereas SunFiber has the ability to only feed targeted beneficial bacteria, specifically Lactobacillus and Bifido, which are the ones that everyone wants to promote anyways. It's so much so that marketing claims of companies are you can't supplement lactobacillus and bifido because they die during the process of ingestion. Not so much in our world, but that's for next month. So the whole purpose of SunFiber, and as it relates to beneficial aspects for microbes, is it feed only microbes that are able to break down the specific Dalton weight, which are the microbes that we want to have in high populations of lacto and bifido in our small and large intestine, because these are the keystone strains that we are given during birth. And they're also the ones that are extremely fragile, bifido especially. And the more you look into the research of bifidobacteria and things like long COVID and degenerative conditions, the correlation seems to be that the lesser quantities of bifido people have, the more likely they are to develop a pathology of some kind, typically immune inflammation related in nature down the line. And for people who are on extremely fiber and carbohydrate restricted diets, for FODMAPs, the people that can't look at an onion without getting gassy, SunFiber is a wonderful thing that they can put in their food or in their water and not have any negative consequence because it works very much in concert with the ecosystem. To have the best benefits, you have to have proper representation. So the partially hydrolyzed guar gum is initially broken down by bifido, which create lactate. The lactate is then taken up by the eubacterium and the Clostridia. Yes, there are beneficial Clostridia, and that's converted into butyrate. The butyrate then has a multitude of different destinations. One, it can be a direct source of fuel, as I mentioned, for the colonocytes, or stimulate the mucosal cells to release more mucus, or based upon the interactions of butyrate with Akkermansia, you can increase quantities of Akkermansia, which is why it's a very hard microbe to supplement as a probiotic. And higher levels of Akkermansia are inversely related or correlated with obesity, glucose metabolism, and poor intestinal immunity. So you can see how the nature of something so simple has such a wide range benefit of impacting not only the local environment, the quantity and the ecology of the microbes, but how the local environment's inner terrain creates a beneficial harmony and symbiosis with the organism that is actually taking care of the microbiome. That's why we are not a separate thing from our microbiome, and our microbes oftentimes have to be looked at as our best friends. And for those who want to dive into some specific research on the SunFiber, I've left this up here. You'll all get the slide so you can dive into seeing the different clinical outcomes. But the short, quick takeaway is SunFiber has been correlated with increased short chain fatty acid production, increased and sustained lactobacillus levels. It enhanced the efficacy of SIBO treatment when paired with antibiotics, which very few people would think about using a fiber in conjunction with an antibiotic, but it does help not only have a greater degree of eradication from SIBO, but it will help anchor some of the die-off potential that antibiotics induce. It has a bifidobacterium stimulating effect and also has the ability to normalize the consistency and frequency of stool when regularly used. So now we get into the last act, everyone, SunFiber in clinical practice. So it's pretty simple and straightforward, right? Take the fiber. That's the long and short of it. Yes, that is the ultimate goal of what we want. But clients are complicated, and I think sometimes it's good to shift gears from a purely scientific perspective to more of a clinical focus. Um, in theory, it's simple. You tell your clients to eat a diverse quantity of foods and you rotate them and make sure that their guts get exposed to different kinds of fiber. Then they realize like that's a lot of work and that's hard, and they don't know how to cook jicama and they don't know how to break down a yucca root. And I'm totally talking from experience. When I bought yucca one time, I didn't even know what to do with it. So it got thrown out. This is the ideal state because ultimately we want to do this from a dietary perspective. And in a perfect world, people with gut health would have, with bad gut health, would have no negative responses to food. But that's also challenging because think about state of someone's gut nowadays. So taking on dietary changes can create challenges for clients. And I was just dealing with this myself this week where I did a dietary prescription for someone, if you will. And the biggest challenge wasn't necessarily the food itself, but it was actually fitting that into their lifestyle. Because on a psychological level, working with people is challenging when they're adopting new behaviors. New behaviors are very energy intensive and they don't provide instant reward feedback. And we're in a society of having things being accessed instantaneously. So over time, um, we want to take a behavior and convert it into a habit. This is why supplements like functional fibers, in my opinion, have such a high success potential. Because if someone's not willing to change their diet, they're probably willing to throw a scoop of fiber or two into a smoothie or a tomato sauce or have it with water and take a probiotic or an enzyme before going to bed. So my entire ethos of working with people is trying to harmonize as many variables in their life as possible. And when you're young, you want to make sure that you do the best job creating the most optimal plan for them. As you start to realize people are challenging and they have things in their life that are set in their ways, and making suggestions and educating them as to why a suggestion is so paramount in an early phase, if they're trying to rebuild their gut, is a very important thing to communicate. You wouldn't think fiber was a very clinically important thing, but not many people think what happens when there's a void of fiber. In most North American people, they think the stats are something like 14 or 12 grams of fiber on average per day or less. When we starve our guts from fiber, the bugs have to turn to something. And the next most valuable source of carbohydrate availability is actually in the glycoproteins of the mucosal layer. So in this study here, they took um, germ-free mice and they basically inoculated them with human microbes. Then they totally starved them of fiber while giving them specific microbes in high doses. And the fiber-free diet resulted in a complete breakdown of the mucosal lining, which then caused the microbes to directly interact with the epithelial cells, which activates the immune system. I believe this is one of the hallmark properties and characteristics that are happening for the average person who's experiencing a multitude of gut issues. Their lack of fiber and food diversity in their diet is actually causing their microbes to degrade the physical barrier that's keeping the peace within the local environment of the gut. This is why this is important to communicate. If our diets decline in fiber, the bacteria that rely upon the fiber eventually die off. When these bacteria die off, the remaining bacteria and the lack of diversity will turn to the mucosal layer for nourishment, and you will create a dysbiosis based upon supporting the only species of microbes that can actually feed off of the glycoproteins there. Therefore, the intestinal layer shrinks and the mucus becomes thinner, and this will generate a compromisation of the gut lining. The minute the gut bacteria interacts with the epithelial cells, we get a few things. We get an immune response, we get a cytokine response, therefore an inflammatory response. We get a breakdown of the tight junction barrier, i.e., we get leaky gut. And then the resulting leaky gut creates a multitude of consequences for the person. One, translocation of LPS and various other constituents of the digestive lumen into the bloodstream. So local inflammation becomes systemic inflammation. Secondly, the translocation of potentially undigested food or incompletely digested food molecules, specifically proteins, prime the immune system and create memory effector cells. So every time the person eats that food, small inflammatory response is generated. And over time, the translocation of microbes from the gut into the circulatory systems can reside in different organs and tissues. And that also includes the translocation of fungus and viruses. So we can reverse these by introducing the right kinds of fibers back into the diet, but you in some cases have to go slow, especially if the person is highly, highly intolerant. And I'm speaking from actual experience right now because I have a scenario in my life that is the perfect mimic of this pattern in terms of what I believe is going on with someone and how I'm restoring that in said person's existence. So this is what we think as clinicians. We think, okay, prebiotics, its primary effects, we have the ability to generate the production of increased short-chain fatty acids, increased lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, and the secondary effects are going to be directly helpful or indirectly helpful to the overall health of the person. And the average individual has been conditioned to go towards injections and stomach surgeries and various things for weight loss. Fiber is one of the best ways to resensitize your body's satiety mechanism, postprandial glucose response, to be an effective catalyst for helping to intervene with metabolic syndrome and regulating postprandial insulin response after food. However, that is an incredibly, shall we say, nerdy way for the average person because the average person is marketed to. So I think becoming really effective in translating this message to clients is of the utmost importance because people only take on and become motivated to establish behaviors that they can experience. So most people would not think that fiber can actually influence weight loss and satiety. Fiber can be a regulator of gut health, so you can feel lighter. You can feel the effects of being less bloated. You can have an easier time having a bowel movement or going on a more regular basis and not dealing with the collateral damage of constipation, and how it really creates a negative feeling in the person's body. And fiber can be one of the best aspects of a preventative health strategy. Incredible amounts of research decrease the risks of common disease, weight management. Um, Again, inflammation is a touchy topic, but the cooling or the management of the immune response with short chain fatty acids, and ultimately building a more diverse gut, building better gut ecology is what everyone should be aiming for when they're using any digestive wellness product, but prebiotics being the pre aspect, pre life, are the most important for the long term benefits because you can't simply supplement your way to optimal gut health by taking tons of probiotics. You have to do it the way nature intended. So this is a little scatter plot or more so, visual association of what the different fibers do. SunSpectrum having the curcumin, the very specific targeted branded curcumin and CoQ10, is really there because it was developed for people who have serious inflammatory issues in the small and large intestine, and its ability to help influence not only what SunFiber does, but the added benefits of curcumin and the CoQ10 help to downregulate things like lipo and cyclooxygenase enzymes, which are makers of prostaglandins. And CoQ10 is one of the most important energy catalyzing nutrients available. And low levels of CoQ10 are typically positively correlated with mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you want to know how this one fits into a clinical spectrum, if someone's dealing with serious gut inflammation, this would be my starting point. Pure SunFiber, which is fast becoming our best-selling product, is the highest concentration of pure fiber. If someone is just wanting to do a preventative strategy, if they're wanting to add something to their smoothie, if they want to make sure that they're hitting their daily recommended amounts of fiber in a day, and they can do so knowing that it's a targeted functional fiber, this would be the go-to. SunFiber GI is more of a lifestyle mediated thing, but it is SunFiber, as I said, paired with probiotic bacteria, specifically Bifidobacteria lactis. These two together really do help stimulate bowel regularity. And TruFiber was our original fiber design on the master supplement side. And the whole idea was it fit together with Enzalase and Theralac Pro as the triangle support of gut health because TruFiber blends the pure SunFiber with the targeted bifidogenic enzymes, i.e., they are enzymes that are specifically designed to influence the local environment of the gut to promote the growth of the very hard to grow and hard to supplement bifidobacteria species. All of these products have their place in the clinical setting. These are my associations in terms of guidance. It doesn't mean that someone who is healthy can't take SunSpectrum because they want to take in more Q10 and more curcumin, or take TruFiber instead of SunFiber. I think rotation is always a good idea when there's no specific condition that one is trying to treat, but ultimately the person's body will always tell you which one it wants best. SunFiber GI is my favorite for being on the go or for traveling because they fit really easily in a suitcase. Whereas SunFiber, if you got to carry on, that's a little hard to get in a small suitcase sometimes. So thank you all. I hope that was informative, enlightening. I hope people are a little bit more wowed by just how impactful and powerful something like PHGG or SunFiber can be. I would really like the idea of the functional fibers to carry on. So look for that as something that we promote over the next little while. If there are any questions, we can pause and take a few direct questions. And I do want to mention, do not forget to connect with us on social media. Our YouTube channel has absolutely every one of the webinars that we've ever done, plus more on there. Instagram channel, and then there is the Following Your Gut podcast with lots of great guests, lots of great episodes that have already been done, and some amazing ones to come. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for dedicating your time to this. Do not miss part 2 next month. We will see you then.